He was a writer and a visual artist, and I was a singer and actress. I remember us walking one day along the river, and we stopped and just sat under some trees, and pretty soon we were laying down and looking through the branches up at the sky, and we decided if there was ever a way we could come back to this place and live, we would do it. I've been back and forth a couple of times to this place. It kind of wraps around your heart and doesn't want to let go. He had gotten hold of some old, weathered barnwood, redwood actually, beautiful stuff, and painted it and made these figures with shadows of a face and bright color, and he brought them upstairs from his studio. And I said, oh, you know, these would be great with some of your stories on them, these little short stories he had been using for his grad project, his final project. Once those stories were stamped on these figures, we noticed that our friends would come over, lots of them other artists, and they would say, I want one. He started going to the Marin swap meet and selling them on weekends. And lo and behold, people were buying them. Out of that work that he was doing came the very first Story People. I can remember on Christmas Eve driving over the Bay Bridge, you know, with the cart stacked full of prints for galleries that were saying, you know, we still want them for the day after Christmas. You've got to come and bring us more, because they're selling like hotcakes. So it was a crazy time, and that was the beginning. So Story People was taking off. We had 2 lively little boys, and just the more and more it grew, the more people we hired. We started in a rental on Court Street, and then we moved to a building on Water Street where I am living now. You know, when you're in it, it seems hectic, but I look back and it seems like those were such a golden time. As Story People grew, Brian was away more and more doing book signings at galleries, and you know, the gallery owners would say, oh my God, he's like a rock star. They line up around the block. But it was hard for me because I was home with the boys and the business, and it got so he was gone more than he was home. At the same time, Brian was increasingly unhappy being here in a small town. We had moved a few times before we arrived here, and I could feel it, that restlessness and that need to go again. The boys and I, especially I, was so heartbroken. I remember the day that we moved from Decorah. It was just such a hard leave-taking. So we moved into this beautiful modern house on Pedregosa Street in Santa Barbara. Pedregosa, by the way, means rocky place. I have to say, that time period, the time that we lived in that house, it was most definitely our rocky place. We hadn't lived in the house but a month when I found a lump under my arm. When they did the biopsy, we learned that it was breast cancer. So I completed my treatment, and it became increasingly obvious that Brian was unsettled and unhappy, that we weren't the us we had been. And he left. I finished treatment in February, and by May he was gone. Serious illness can be a huge stress on a marriage. And generally a marriage will survive if there haven't been other stresses before that. And I think that was the case with Brian and me. You know, all the moves, honestly, just the fact that he is a wings guy. He loves travel. He's an adventurer. What I am more aware of as I get older is that I am a roots woman. And being in a place and knowing it, and knowing the people, and knowing their lives, and the passing of events that make a life is what matters to me. The process of deciding to move back wasn't exactly linear. It was more like a dance. You know, I would come back to work with Story People for a couple weeks at a time, and every time I was back, I felt this deeper sense of knowing that this was going to be my place. There was a moment, the very last visit I had, the summer before we came back, I was walking to the Bethania church, and I was headed to a concert there. It had been one of those amazing thunderstorms that seem to only happen in the Midwest. You see those dark clouds in one area and the sun shining in the other, and I turned as I was walking to the church to look back at the town, thinking there has to be a rainbow, and in fact there were two. I stood there and took it in, and that was the moment that I knew that this was my place, that I was coming back without a doubt. The thing about Decorah is that it's a small town in so many ways, in all the good ways. You go to shop for groceries and you see all sorts of people you know, and you're always caught up on their life because of the way that daily contact just weaves strong fabric of community. I went to a poetry slam the other night. It was at the Elks Club. The place was packed, and the poetry was wonderful. The feeling of community was palpable. It was just another one of those moments where I think, this is why I know I can stay. I can stay here for the rest of my life. My whole life, certainly my whole adult life, has been about stories. Story People is about the stories that connect us to one another. And I think that the stories we tell ourselves matter so much more than we think. This life that we live in here, it gives us what we end up with. Bad things can happen, but if you can find a way to tell the story that gives you power, that gives you the ability to keep making home, that's what matters.